All right, Dr. Josh here in the masterclass of digestion. So I'm going to teach you our RPA processes on nutrition, metabolic matching, and digestion. We'll wrap it up with talking about some digestive function. I don't want our process at this point to be on digestive dysfunction and fixing the gut, and then that's the first process. So digestion. In the second process of this metabolic reboot, we're talking more about how we're breaking down, we're going into deeper detoxification, so we're breaking down cellular materials, okay, or what you would call autophagy, in order to clean us out. Now, in this process, we are going to certainly improve in a major way our body composition, okay? And so we want to be leaner, we want to be lighter, we want to have more energy, we want to be efficient, we want to have body efficiency and systems that are working in an optimal foundational levels. So I want to talk about my nutrition foundation, I want to talk about metabolic matching and fasting, and I want to talk about digestive function. I'm going to wrap this up, all right? So I work with a lot of people ranging from bodybuilders to kids, to athletes, to overweight adults, to metabolically challenged adults, to disease processes, to high-level professional and Olympic performance athletes, right? So I don't have one specific nutrition process because everybody needs something different when it comes to customization. So we have 4 foundational pillars that we talk about through RPA Nutrition. So let me talk about the 4. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? Process number 1 is talking about eating real food, okay? So which is animal and plant, okay? So think about this. These foods right here, they're in their organic compound. Our body is designed to be able to break down the organic compounds of these foods to pull out the nutrients correctly. So there's, I guess, basically, the first thing that's part of our foundational process is changing the way that you eat. So we're eating the food in its organic state. So there's a difference between this and what we would call purified food. So think of a loaf of bread. If you turn that loaf of bread around on its package and you look at the label and you see all those ingredients in that label or any other label where a food is put together, okay? That's purified food. And these purified foods are not designed to be able to provide us the nutrients that we need, as well as a food that's in its natural organic compound, right? So an animal has protein and fat, and your plant has your fibers and some carbohydrates and some fats, and a lot of the nutrients and materials and minerals that we need in order to support our body's cellular processes. So our foundation number 1 is eating real food, which is plant and animal, okay? Number 2, now this is a long-winded one right here, and you're probably going to have to rewind it and think about it a little bit. But accelerated aging, or to decelerate aging and disease, we're looking at the difference, okay, between toxicity versus deficiency, okay, so food toxicity versus nutrient deficiency, or toxicity plus deficiency. And so think about that. If we are in a toxic state, we're creating problems. If we're in a deficient state, we're creating problems. So there is a nutritional balance in there, so we're not over-toxifying and we're not undernourishing. The next one is toxicity plus deficiency. So we're eating foods that are highly toxic, but they're deficient in the nutrients that we need, right? So that is a predictor to age acceleration and disease processes. So toxicity, deficiency, and so that we'll put a verse in there, and then we're going to do toxicity plus deficiency. So we want to get people into a place where they're in a well-nourished situation without creating toxicity, but also negating deficiencies. All right. Number 3, the difference between nutrient density, okay, versus calories. Gone is the process of counting calories. So think of this, and I'm going to call out Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers, unless it's changed, works on a point system. And that point system is saying, oh, you can have 15 points worth of food, and here's all the food with the point structure on it, right? So a cupcake, and I'm just making it up because I have no idea what the point structure is, but you eat a cupcake, right? It doesn't matter what cupcake, right? So you can get the crappiest one from the store that has what we talked about already. It has the grains in it, okay? So it has the wheat, it has the sugar, it has all the additives, all right? It's purified, all right? And it's highly toxic and deficient in its nutrients. And it's 8 points. So 8 points for a cupcake. Then you have a full day that you can have 15 points, right? So my day I can have 15 points. I can have one cupcake. I have 7 points left that I can do anything. But what you've eaten in those 8 points is everything that we're not standing for. So what you've done is you're looking at a caloric intake or even some sort of like point intake, but you're depriving yourself of the nutrients that you need. And think of like all the popular fad diets and fad ways for losing weight. Eat less, exercise more, right? That's just a recipe for energy deprivation and a cellular failure mechanism, right? It doesn't even get into metabolic matching. So that's the third one, and then the last one is real eating. And so you can correlate that with number one, but when you talk about real eating, let's go back into what human part of our evolution, what human was the healthiest. And the Paleolithic, the Stone Age human was the healthiest based on carbon studies, based on getting the information out of their DNA, okay, with the least disease processes and cavities and all that stuff, because they were hunter-gatherers. They ate animal and plant on what they could get a hold of, right? Which means that they could go days without eating, but they didn't have the sugars and the sweets and the prefabbed food and all that. So they were the healthiest human to come through our evolution. And so their process was made up of mostly fats. And again, this is for a different topic here, but we want to eat mostly fats at around 70%, okay? And then there's protein. So we're looking at possibly 15 to 20. That is one that I base on grams and body weight, depending on who I'm working with. And then ultimately carbohydrates. And we know this. Now, what does that look like? It looks like a ketogenic diet. But we don't call it a ketogenic diet. I like to call it super fatty, all right, or Paleolithic because it's high fat. The high fat feeds the brain, all right? And as we get into talking about metabolic matching, this high fat diet is a preferred fuel source for the human body for most humans, all right? And so let's get into it, right? Let me plug this back in. So let's get into it. Looking for my eraser. So let's get into this. All right, so we have our foundation, we have the 4 points, and now we're getting into that our body needs high levels of fat, so high levels up to 70%. Proteins, okay, we need to modulate those based on body weight and intake, because too high a protein can become toxic or problematic to the intestinal system. And carbohydrates should be low. There's a lot of studies now, and as we're really digging into this, showing that our liver can make the sugar that our body needs. So we're going to be lower on the carbohydrates and higher on the proteins and very, very high on the fat. All right. Now, think of this. We're going to get into metabolic matching, and we're going to talk about autophagy, and we're talking about digestion. So we're breaking down our own cellular material to create the energy that we need, but also to create an internal audit so we do have the correct body composition, correct cellular function based on this metabolic reboot. So we're gonna move our body into this nutritional concept right here, because think of this. If we have a cell, and our cell is a bifat layer right here. So our cell has 2 layers of fat as its membrane, and inside all of the machinery, whether it's the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, DNA, whatever, all of our machinery is basically protein. So we're in a fasting state, when we're in a state that we want to use our machinery for fuel, we have to get into a spot where we're matching that. So if we're on a high vegetable diet and we're on a high fruit diet, that's not metabolic matching. So we're going to have to, the first thing we're going to have to do to create metabolic matching is transition our eating, okay, into high fat, modulating proteins, and low carbohydrates. And so we have processes to help you either look at that from the surface, because if you've heard my golf synonym, you can do this stuff on your own, or we can customize and program it out for you based on your body composition and other factors to know that you're doing this right, and not running around being like, oh, I'm in keto, I'm ketogenesis. We're not trying to achieve that, okay? We're trying to achieve metabolic matching, and we're trying to achieve processes of fasting that are very, very good for the human body to audit, to increase immune mechanisms, to make sure that the body is in balance, right? Because if you're eating all the time, you can't let your body attend to the other functions that need to happen. And again, that would probably be in a whole nother process there. So fats, proteins, carbohydrates, we want to mimic that. And another thing too, so when we talk about digestion and we talk about the human digestive system, so if you think of rudimentary animals, you think of cows, you think of the animals that eat vegetables, they are able from their foregut to ferment these vegetables very, very fast. We don't have that capability. Our brains have grown. We're the species on this planet that have the largest brains, and the brain asks for the most energy out of our body to operate because it controls and coordinates every living tissue that we have, right? So we want to break down fat for fuel. It's a more efficient fuel source, the right fats, and it's readily usable. It's readily broke down without much byproduct to create the energy, the ATP, that our body needs. And so that's metabolic matching and fasting. So when we get into fasting, then real quick, so once we start to metabolically match, then we can get into fasting processes. And fasting processes can work on, we can start at 12-12. So 12-12 meaning here's our fasting and here's our eating window. Then we can get into 14-10, okay, which is our fasting and eating window. And then ultimately we want to get to a 16-8. And there's more extremes, but this is the one that's really researched through a lot of good articles and books that are written and other doctors that are really preaching the fasting. But the 16-8, your 16 hours of fasting allows your body to get into an autophagy state. And that is going to be the most metabolically efficient, okay, place to be. And there's a lot of components in getting in there. Now, my quick story on fasting and metabolic matching. I got into this structure, I think it's got to be about 5 years ago. And I got into this structure where I got to 16-hour fast, 8-hour eating. I had 70, 20, 10 on fats, carbohydrates, protein. And it was tough because I was training, I was working out at the time. So it was tough in those first few months to recoup my energy after I was exercising, because I was exercising in hour number 15. So right before. So you can imagine when you're depleting everything and now you're calling on your body's reserves to power you through your workup, that was pretty nasty. But the two things that happened to me. Now, when I grew up, I was 170 pounds. I was 170 pounds in 7th grade. I played hockey at 175. And then after hockey was over, I got down to about 165. So the year long that I started this process, because the whole process that I'm teaching you took me 2 years to get through my whole transformation and keep that transition, which I'll talk about. But I went from 15%. Now, when I was a kid, I was probably 25%, but over the past 10 to 12 years, I've gotten down to 15%. In the 1 year that I did this, I went from 15% to 9% body fat, and I got down to about 157 pounds, which I hover right now at about 163, which that's what I really like. My strength, this is the best. My body function is the best. My energy is the best. So I hover around 163. And the reason I'm telling you this is because we use a body composition machine. So I have all the statistics for all those years. And the other things that were changing me is my visceral fat went down. My BMI, my body mass index went down. My metabolic age. So if you've never learned about metabolic age, your metabolic age is a great algorithm through this software to understand how well your body, like how young your body's functioning versus your biologic age. And I got my biologic age down to 24 years old as a late 30-year-old. I think it was even now, because now it's like 25 and I'm 43, so it's pretty awesome. So I know that my body inside is functioning like a 25-year-old, because my goal is to live to 120. So right now, metabolically, I think I'm gonna achieve that. And so I did these processes on myself. And if you listen to the opening, the introduction story, this is what I started to do with my patients, whether it was customized or just giving them the process to do in functional medicine. And they were starting to do this. So I've seen 20-pound weight loss in a month. I've seen 85 pounds in 8 months. So it's possible to do this. Now, the reason I put down here at the last digestive function is because if we have digestive dysfunction, if we have a gut that's not working correctly, all right, that has to be attended to for all this to work correctly. And I'm not discounting that and saying that you can't get into this, but you've heard the things like leaky gut, you've heard the celiac and ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, which are the disease processes of those. But leaky gut and irritable bowel and bloating and all these other things, which I'll do different videos on, that is representation of gut dysfunction. And so when we're looking at the way that our body digests, first we have to digest. So when we get food in, we have to break down those foods in order for their individual amino acids to be absorbed. Okay, so we're looking at digestion, then we're looking at absorption, okay, and then we're looking at elimination. So there's a lot to say on this, but ultimately these processes in digestion have to work right in order for this to work right. And there's things that can impede this here, which are an imbalanced microbiome, so yeast, funguses, bacteria, toxic bacteria that can build up in proportional amounts and start to wreak havoc on our intestinal function. The toxins, the foods that we eat, can beat holes in our intestinal wall, which create the leaky gut. So you're letting in undigested food, which ignites the immune system and the inflammatory response. So there's a lot of different things that can affect the functionality of our digestive function. And our digestive system, so our gut, is truly our second brain. And there is a straight reservoir that goes from our gut to our brain called the vagus nerve. And so the way that our gut is affected and the gut wall is affected is the same exact way that our brain can be affected and the blood-brain barrier can be affected. So there's a lot here. This is a whole nother process, but it is part of what we do, why we clean up our diet, why we eat the way that we eat, the things that we take out, and the nutrients that we use to support, I should say the supplements that we use to support our nutrient density. And so in the process of the metabolic reboot in phase 2, so month number 2, we're using materials that are supporting the upregulation of our autophagy processes. Okay, so cyclic AMPK. We're still using our binders to get the materials that are broken down and out. We're still supporting our detoxification process, because what you'll learn in masterclass number 3 is that we're setting the body up to produce massive amounts of energy so we can get the metabolic change that we're looking for to reestablish and hold the awesome foundations of our health. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I will see you in masterclass number 3. Talk to you soon.